Imagine a teenage boy found face down on a beach, lungs filled not with water, but with sand. No waves, no drowning, just a body, and a question that chills investigators to this day. Why would someone inhale sand until death? Was it an accident, a ritual, or a deliberate act of murder disguised by the sea's silence? This is the haunting mystery of Terry Sutter, a case so strange that even decades later, it feels less like a crime scene and more like a puzzle carved into the shoreline. Disclaimer: this story is based on real-life events. All details are presented respectfully, and while theories and interpretations are explored, the tragedy of the victim remains at the center of this narrative. Terry Sutter was just 15 years old when his life ended in one of the most bizarre ways imaginable. On September 1st, 1973, he left his house in Alpena, Michigan, to go see a movie with his friends. Like any teenager, he was simply enjoying the last days of summer. But when the movie ended, Terry never came home. By the next morning, his body was discovered on the sandy shoreline near Lake Huron. The circumstances of his death stunned authorities. There were no signs of drowning, no evidence of a violent struggle, and yet his lungs were packed with sand. The official cause of death: suffocation. But the method? That remains unknown. Was Terry forced into the sand by someone stronger? Did he collapse accidentally, inhaling the ground itself in a freak mishap? Or was something darker at play? A group initiation, a cruel prank gone wrong, or a deliberate killing masked by the elements? The police investigation in 1973 brought more questions than answers. His family, stunned with grief, believed foul play was obvious. His friends had no explanation. And the small-town investigators lacked the resources to dig deeper into a case so unusual, it bordered on impossible. Terry Sutter. Ter's death became more than just a crime. It became a riddle whispered through Alpena's history. Even now, more than 50 years later, this mystery refuses to fade. What could make a boy inhale enough sand to end his life? Was it chance, or something chillingly intentional? And this is just the beginning of the story. To understand Terry Sutter's mysterious end, we have to go back to the last hours of his life, a seemingly ordinary day in Alpena, Michigan. September 1st, 1973 was warm, the kind of summer evening when teenagers lingered outside, clinging to freedom before school routines returned. Terry, a 15-year-old high school sophomore, had plans as simple as any other: head out to the local theater with friends, catch a film, and come home before dark. Witnesses later recalled seeing him laughing, joking, and walking casually into the cinema. By all accounts, nothing seemed unusual. His friends confirmed that he stayed until the end of the show, but what happened after is where the story blurs. When the crowd spilled out of the theater, Terry was suddenly no longer with them. Some believed he walked home alone. Others claimed he may have taken a detour, possibly to the nearby beach. What's strange is that no one saw him make this decision. He simply vanished into the night. When Terry didn't come home, his family grew worried. He wasn't the kind of kid to stay out past curfew. By dawn, their worst fears began to materialize. Searchers spotted his body lying face down on the sand near the Thunder Bay River, a location not far from Lake Huron's restless waters. The scene was unsettling. His clothes were dusty and marked, his face partially buried, and the sand deep inside his lungs told investigators one undeniable fact: he hadn't drowned in water, but in earth. There were no signs of robbery, no missing belongings, no clear motive. The autopsy suggested suffocation, but it couldn't explain how a healthy teenager would end up inhaling so much sand unless someone forced him down or something bizarre occurred. The timeline only deepened the mystery. In just a few short hours, Terry went from a cheerful moviegoer to the victim of one of the strangest deaths in Michigan's history. Some locals whispered about gangs, hazing rituals, or even occult practices that might have forced Terry into the sand. Others believed it was a tragic accident. But how does one accidentally bury their own face deep enough to choke? The questions multiplied, and as the rumors grew, So did a chilling possibility. Someone in the town might know more than they admitted. But who could have silenced a boy like Terry? And why? When Terry Sutter's body was first examined, investigators were immediately struck by the bizarre nature of his death. Suffocation by sand was not only rare, it was almost unheard of. The Alpena County Sheriff's Department treated the case as suspicious from the beginning. But in 1973, resources in a small town were limited. The officers didn't have advanced forensics, no DNA testing, and no specialized crime scene units. What they had was a lifeless teenager, a beach scattered with footprints, and far too many unanswered questions. Detectives started with the most obvious possibility: accident. Could Terry have been playing, lying face down in the sand, and somehow inhaled enough to suffocate? Medical examiners quickly pushed this aside. The amount of sand in his lungs was not something a boy would inhale casually. It required force or prolonged exposure. This fact alone tilted the case toward foul play. They next considered drowning, but his lungs had no water, only sand. Some investigators theorized he might have been forced face first into the shoreline until the grains choked him. If that was true, it would mean another person had been there, strong enough to overpower him, determined enough to kill him in a cruel and silent way. Police interviewed his friends, searching for clues. No one admitted seeing Terry leave the theater with someone suspicious. There were no reports of enemies, no rivalries that could explain such brutality. Terry was remembered as an ordinary, well-liked teenager. The absence of motive only deepened the strangeness. The condition of his body added further puzzles. His clothes were dusty, showing marks that could have been from a scuffle, though nothing conclusive. No bruises or wounds suggested a violent beating. It was as if someone had chosen the most silent method possible to end his life. A murder without a weapon, without no eyes, without blood. For weeks, investigators scoured the beach and interviewed locals. Some whispered of gangs or older teens involved in dangerous dares. Others believed Terry stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to see and paid the price. The silence of witnesses, whether from fear or ignorance, meant no concrete evidence emerged. The case stalled. Files grew thin, and a teenager's life became reduced to a single haunting question: who pushed him into the sand, and why? As months turned into years, the answers didn't come, but the rumors only grew louder. As Terry Sutter's case lingered unsolved, whispers began filling the silence left by the official investigation. In a small town like Alpena, rumors travel faster than truth, and each theory added a new layer of darkness to the mystery. The most unsettling possibility was that Terry had been murdered by someone he knew, perhaps even another teenager. The idea of a friend or classmate holding him down in the sand was almost too chilling to consider, but investigators couldn't dismiss it. One theory suggested hazing. In the early 1970s, initiation rituals for local clubs or gangs weren't unheard of. Could Terry have been the victim of a cruel dare that went tragically wrong? Some residents whispered that a group of boys may have pinned him down as part of a prank, never realizing the horror of what would happen. If so, fear of exposure could explain why no one stepped forward with the truth. But without evidence or confession, it remained only speculation. Another theory leaned into darker territory: occult activity. The 1970s saw growing fears about rituals, secret gatherings, and whispers of satanic influence. Some locals believed Terry's death was staged, a symbolic act where sand replaced drowning, meant to leave a haunting message. Police never confirmed such claims, but the eerie nature of his suffocation kept these rumors alive for years. Then there was the possibility of an accident cloaked in tragedy. Some thought Terry may have stumbled near the shoreline, fallen unconscious, and suffocated naturally. But medical examiners pushed against this. The amount of sand inhaled was too extreme. This wasn't a simple collapse. It was a struggle, intentional or not. Each theory painted a different picture, but all shared one unsettling truth. The answers lay not in the sand, but in the silence of those around him. If anyone saw what really happened, they had never spoken. The investigation soon slowed, resources drained, and attention drifted elsewhere. But the people of Alpena couldn't forget. For every teenager who walked that beach in the years after, Terry's story hung over them like a shadow, a reminder that something terrible had happened there, and that the mystery of why had never been solved. And as the years passed, the case took on a new form. Not just a tragedy, but a legend that refused to die. As the 1970s rolled on, Alpena, Michigan, carried Terry Sutter's death like a wound that never healed. It wasn't just the family that grieved, it was the whole town. The bizarre manner of his passing gave way to whispers in diners, hushed tones in schools, and even fearful glances whenever the beach came up in conversation. For many, it was easier to treat Terry's death not as an unsolved crime, but as something unexplainable, a nightmare best left unspoken. Terry's family, however, could not let it fade. His mother insisted that foul play had been involved. She believed her son would never willingly put himself in such danger. But without solid evidence, her cries for justice remained unheard. The police, overwhelmed and unequipped, quietly shelved the case. What was left behind was a teenage boy's gravestone and a silence that felt heavier than any truth. The beach where Terry died became a place teenagers avoided after dark. Stories spread like wildfire. Some swore they felt a presence near the water. Others whispered that Terry's spirit lingered, searching for justice. While skeptics dismissed this as imagination, the fact remained. The sand had taken a boy in an unnatural way, and no one had ever explained why. The beach became not just a place of summer fun, but a symbol of unanswered horror. Over time, local newspapers occasionally revisited the case, keeping the memory alive. Each article carried the same haunting details: lungs filled with sand, no water, no witnesses, no suspects. Journalists asked the same questions investigators had failed to answer, and each time, the public's fascination with the tragedy reignited. Some even began to wonder if Terry's death was never meant to be solved. Perhaps it was one of those rare events that slipped through the cracks of logic and reason, existing only as a permanent mystery. But that didn't stop the endless speculation. From accidental suffocation to targeted killing, the possibilities remained wide open, and every theory seemed both possible and impossible at the same time. By the end of the decade, Terry's case had transformed into something larger than itself. Not just an unsolved death, but a chilling reminder of how fragile and fleeting life could be. And though time moved forward, one truth remained. Alpena would never forget the boy who suffocated in sand. But this haunting silence would not last forever. In later years, new voices would emerge, reigniting the mystery in ways no one expected. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the mystery of Terry Sutter's death was no longer fresh in the minds of investigators, but it was far from forgotten by the people of Alpena. Old rumors had a way of resurfacing, like waves that refused to settle. And as new generations grew up hearing fragments of the story, curiosity turned into obsession. Locals who had been teenagers in 1973 sometimes revealed more in hushed conversations than they had ever admitted to police. Some claimed there had been a group of older boys involved in roughhousing with Terry that night. Others whispered about a secret gathering on the beach, something that got out of hand. These claims were never backed by evidence, but they carried the sting of guilt, as though some people in town knew far more than they would ever confess. The strange part was how the case almost seemed to shift shapes over time. To some, it was a tragic accident. To others, it was ritualistic murder. To Terry's grieving family, it was an unsolved crime that authorities had failed to pursue. Every retelling only deepened the sense that truth was being hidden in plain sight. And here's where you come in. If you were standing on that beach in 1973, with only Terry and the sand, what theory would you lean toward? Was it a cruel prank gone wrong, a secret initiation, or something even darker? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us not just what you believe, but also where in the world you're watching from and what time it is right now. It might seem like a small thing, but sharing your perspective connects you directly to this unsolved mystery, as if the investigation itself is unfolding in real time. Because that's what makes Terry's case so powerful, the feeling that it isn't just a story from decades ago, but a living question still waiting for answers. The whispers never stopped, and in time, as cold case. Interest grew across America. Terry Sutter's death began to draw attention outside Alpena. Strangers who never set foot in Michigan started asking the same haunting question: how could a boy die by inhaling sand? And with that attention came something unexpected. Amateur investigators determined to crack the case. Decades after Terry Sutter's death, a new wave of interest arrived from an unlikely source: ordinary people with extraordinary determination. By the 2000s, the rise of the internet meant that cases long considered cold could suddenly find new life in the hands of amateur investigators. Online forums, true crime communities, and independent researchers began to examine the strange details of Terry's story. The questions they asked mirrored the frustrations of Alpena locals. How does someone suffocate on sand without a struggle? Why were no serious suspects ever identified? Could there have been a cover-up, intentional or not, by people too close to the case? These digital detectives dissected newspaper articles, interviewed anyone willing to talk, and pieced together timelines that had once gathered dust. Some sleuths zeroed in on the idea of hazing. They argued that Terry's death carried the hallmarks of a prank taken too far, a group of boys pushing him into the sand, never realizing the danger. Panic afterward, combined with fear of consequences, might have led to silence. If true, that would explain why rumors persisted for decades, yet no confessions were ever made. Others leaned toward a darker, more sinister interpretation. They suggested Terry may have stumbled upon something criminal that night, perhaps illegal activity near the waterfront. If so, his death might have been an act of silencing, staged in a way so strange it appeared almost accidental. And then there were those who couldn't shake the ritual theory. The bizarre nature of his suffocation, lungs filled only with sand, carried a symbolic weight to some investigators. Was it an intentional act designed to leave a mystery, as though someone wanted the case to remain unsolved? For Terry's family, these renewed efforts brought a bittersweet sense of hope. They had never stopped believing our son's death was not an accident. Seeing strangers pick up the case validated their cries for justice. Yet every theory without proof was another reminder of the truth that continued to slip away. The internet gave the case reach it had never had before, but it also birthed a new challenge. With so many theories, how could anyone ever know which path led closest to the truth? And as interest grew online, one revelation threatened to change everything. A claim that evidence may have been overlooked from the very beginning. When cold case enthusiasts began digging into Terry Sutter's death, one theme kept resurfacing. What if the truth had been there all along, buried not in sand but in paperwork? Reports from the 1970s investigation suggested that the autopsy was unusual, yet handled with alarming simplicity. The medical examiner noted sand packed deep into Terry's lungs, with little to no water present. Yet, despite the strangeness of this discovery, no follow-up toxicology was ever pursued. Questions about whether substances could have been involved, drugs, alcohol, even sedatives, remained unanswered. For some sleuths, this wasn't just an oversight, it was negligence. Even more troubling were the police reports. Details contradicted each other. In one version, Terry was said to have been walking near the beach alone. In another, he was with friends earlier in the night. Which account was true? Why hadn't those closest to him been questioned more aggressively? The lack of clarity left space for theories to flourish. Some pointed to photographs taken at the scene, which were rumored to exist but never released publicly. If such images had shown inconsistencies, signs of a struggle, marks on the body, or unusual disturbances in the sand, they might have provided vital clues. But without transparency, those photos became ghosts of evidence, whispered about, but never seen. For Terry's family, these questions weren't abstract. His mother had long believed investigators had failed her son. She claimed officials had been too quick to dismiss the death as an accident, unwilling to consider the darker possibilities. Whether this reluctance came from incompetence or intentional cover-up remained a matter of fierce debate. And yet, the deeper the case was examined, the more it seemed like Alpena itself held the answers. The beach, the night of the incident, the boys who may have been there. As says, everything pointed back to a community that had quietly sealed its lips for decades. Evidence wasn't missing. It was locked inside memories people refused to share. If that silence could ever be broken, perhaps Terry's death wouldn't just be a tragic story. It would finally be a solved one. The more outsiders investigated Terry Sutter's strange death, the clearer one thing became. The silence surrounding the case was not just absence of answers. It was a presence in itself, like a wall built deliberately, brick by brick, to keep the truth hidden. People who had been teenagers in Alpena during 1973 were now adults with families of their own. Yet many still refused to speak openly about that night. Some dodged questions. Others grew visibly uncomfortable when Terry's name was mentioned. It was as if the entire community carried an unspoken agreement. The less said, the safer. Why such fear? Was it loyalty to friends who may have been involved? Was it shame, knowing that a prank or confrontation had gone horribly wrong? Or was it something darker? Knowledge of a crime that had been buried along with Terry's body? For amateur sleuths, this collective silence was its own kind of evidence. After all, if Terry's death had truly been an accident, why had so many people spent decades avoiding the subject? What was left unspoken weighed heavier than any autopsy report. Psychologists who studied similar cold cases suggested a phenomenon known as diffusion of guilt. When multiple people share involvement in a tragedy, none of them feel fully responsible. Each believes someone else should come forward. But as time stretches on, guilt transforms into silence, and silence into permanent secrecy. Could this explain why no one in Alpena had ever broken ranks? Meanwhile, the town itself had changed. Generations grew up, businesses shifted, the shoreline eroded. Yet Terry's story refused to wash away. His grave remained a silent reminder that someone, somewhere, still knew the truth. For Terry's family, the pain was endless. His mother went to her death without ever seeing justice. Relatives who remained carried the ache like an inheritance, a burden passed down. They knew Terry hadn't simply fallen asleep in the sand. Someone, or some group, had been responsible. But the tragedy of this case was that the answer, if it ever existed, had been locked away in memories and fears that no investigator could pry open. The silence had outlived the witnesses. And yet mysteries like these rarely rest forever. For every unsolved case, there is always the possibility of revelation, sometimes decades later, in the most unexpected ways. Nearly 50 years have passed since Terry Sutter walked the shores of Alpena and never came back. His death, lungs filled with sand, no water, no answers, remains one of the strangest cold cases in American history. No arrests, no confessions, no closure. Just a boy's life stolen in a way that makes less sense with each passing year. For the people of Alpena, Terry's story has become more than just a case file. It is a ghost that lingers in the air, a reminder of how easily truth can be buried beneath silence. Some say it was a prank gone wrong. Others whisper about darker forces at play. But the fact that no one has ever spoken, no witness has ever come forward, and no evidence has ever fully surfaced, makes this case more unsettling than most. And that may be why it refuses to fade away. Terry's death is not just a tragedy, it's a question without an answer. One that will keep resurfacing in whispers, in forums, in late-night conversations, until someone, somewhere, finally breaks the silence. But here's where you come in. Cases like Terry Sutter's remind us that mysteries are not solved by investigators alone. They are solved by communities who refuse to let them be forgotten. Do you believe Terry was the victim of a prank, an accident, or something much darker? And most importantly, do you think the truth will ever come out, even after half a century of silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective keeps this case alive, and who knows, one day, the right theory might just lead to the truth. If you found yourself haunted by this story, make sure you subscribe to Black Thread Mysteries, hit the bell so you never miss the next deep dive, and share this video with someone who loves unsolved mysteries as much as you do. Because sometimes, the scariest mysteries aren't about monsters or ghosts. Sometimes they're about people. And Terry Sutter's story is proof that the darkest truths can hide in plain sight. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and never stop asking questions.